Hello friends, thank you for watching this video. I am Mohamad and today we will be building a .NET Core app which supports dependency injection, Serilog logging and app setting configuration. Please like, share and subscribe if you like this video. It will really help the channel. So, what are we gonna be covering today? First, we're gonna be discussing the development ingredients, which is gonna be the tools that we need in order for us to jumpstart into development. Then we're gonna be discussing some of the functionality that we're gonna be building. And lastly, we're gonna start coding. So, what are the ingredients? Basically, we need two things: Visual Studio Code, which can be freely downloaded through the link that's available on the screen. I'll also add those links in the description down below. As well, we need the .NET Core SDK, which is also can be freely downloaded through the links. Next, we're gonna be developing these three main functionalities to our console application. First, we're gonna implement dependency injection. Then we're gonna be adding Serilog logging for it to replace the default logs that the .NET framework provides, .NET Core frameworks provide. And lastly, we're gonna be reading all of our configuration from the app settings instead of hard coding them into our code. Let us start coding. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna check if our .NET Core SDK has been installed successfully. In order for us to do that, we need to type .NET --version, and as we can see, we have the latest version installed, which is 5.0.201. If you see any other number, that should be okay. If you see any error message, you need to re-download and install the SDK again. Now we're gonna start by creating our application inside our terminal. To do that, we're gonna be utilizing the .NET new keyword. So .NET new console, and we're gonna give this application a name, sample app. This will take a few seconds. Perfect. Now it has been created successfully. Let us navigate to it and let's open it inside our code editor, which is gonna be Visual Studio Code. Perfect. The first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna open the terminal. We have to go to View, and we can see we have terminal here, and now we have the integrated terminal inside Visual Studio Code. We're gonna start by building the application to make sure it's building successfully. So .NET build, and this will also take a few seconds, and we can see it's building succeeded. Now let's run it to make sure that we get the hello world. .NET run, and we got the hello world. Perfect. So once we have done that, the next step is for us to add some of the packages that we're going to be utilizing. In total, we're going to have 4 packages, and let's start adding them. So it's going to be .NET add package. The first one is going to be Microsoft .extensions .hosting. This should also take a few seconds. The second one is .NET add package Serilog .extension .hosting. Also, this will take a few seconds. Then we're going to be adding also Serilog, which is .NET add package Serilog .settings .configuration. And lastly, we're gonna add .NET add package Serilog .syncs .console. Perfect. Now these 4 dependency or 4 packages has been installed. We can verify that they are installed by going to our sample app.cs proj. And once we open it, we can see that we have the 4 packages installed there. Perfect. So the next step for us is we need to create our appsettings.json. In order for us to do that, inside our root folder, we right click, new file, appsettings.json. Perfect. And now we need to start populating our app settings so we can utilize them with our sample code that we're going to be creating as well as with Serilog. So What we're gonna do first is we're gonna be adding the Serilog configuration. So we'll call it Serilog, and then we're gonna be specifying the minimal level. So that means the minimal level of logs that we want to display. So by default, we're gonna be displaying for testing information is the information level, and we're gonna override them onto items. So override for system was gonna be on warning, and for Microsoft it's gonna be on information as well. Let's add a dummy connection string for now. We'll call it default connection, and let's give it any random connection data source. For SQLite, we'll call it appdb, for example, and let's make it cache equal shared. That's sample one. We're not gonna really use it. We're just gonna see if we can implement it within our dependency injection. So what does minimal level mean, default mean, and override here mean? So basically the minimal level means that what is the minimum level of logs that we want, and we can have information, we can have debugging, we can have errors. For this sample application, we're gonna go with information level, and we're gonna the reason that we added override here to display how we can override some of the configuration for Serilog. So we said although we want all of the information that is gonna be logged on information level, we're gonna override this configuration only for two. So we're gonna be overriding here only for two namespaces, which is the settings and Microsoft. We can have a lot of different namespaces, but right now, because only these two namespaces that we wanna override. So for example, let's say we were using entity framework. For example, if we put, for example, EF, it's gonna be under Microsoft. So for example, we can put Microsoft.ef core, for example, and we can put here only on error level. On error. So that means only the errors that's popping up of entity framework namespace is gonna show. So for this reason, we only input here the namespace and the level that we wanna log for that namespace in specific. Great. So once we have added those, our next step is to actually start building our application. So let's navigate to our program.cs, and inside here we're gonna start adding our configuration methods. So that configuration methods that we're gonna add right now is gonna be responsible for reading the app settings and actually make it available. So let's start by creating a new method. It's gonna be static void, and we're gonna call it config setup, and it's gonna take an I configuration builder, and let's fix those references. And now let's use builder dot set base path. Basically we're telling it where to find this file, and now we're telling it that it needs to find it from the root folder. So directory dot get current directory. Let's also fix those references. Perfect. Then we're gonna tell it to read the JSON file, so add JSON file, and then we're gonna be providing the name for it. So it's gonna be appsettings.json. And then is it an optional file? Of course we don't want it optional, it has to be there, so we're gonna put optional false. And do we want it to reload on change? So if we do any changes to the app settings, do we want to reload those configuration? Yes, so we're gonna put reload on change. Reload on change, gonna put to true. And lastly, we're gonna add the add environmental variable. So let us summarize what we did here. So we added a new method called config setup, which is gonna be basically able to read the application settings file that we have created. And the first thing is set base path. We're just telling it where should it find that the directory where it should find that file. Second, we're gonna telling it what's the name of the file that it needs to look for, and if it's gonna be optional to finding it, and does it need to reload it every time we do change for it. And lastly, if we're saying if we have environmental variables that we need to take into consideration. So sometimes, for example, we can add dotnet add, for example, I think it's called var, and we can set up the environment, the secrets and key that we want, and that's gonna be a environmental variable, which is not gonna be available within app settings, but it's gonna be available on the OS level. So, and those environmental variable can override the application settings that we have. So for example, if we have a connection string inside our app settings and we add another one inside our for example, environmental variable, the one within the environmental variable will be will take priority over the one within our app settings. And for this reason, the application will run basically only on the environmental variables. For this reason, we have added it, but if you don't want, you don't really need to add it. It's just like a good practice to have it there. So once we have that ready, next step is we need to build our startup methods, which is going to be basically mimicking the startup class in an ASP.NET Core application. So this method also going to be static. It's going to return an iHost. We're going to explain that why later on, and we're going to call app startup. Perfect. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define, first let us fix those references. And then we're going to be starting to define our configuration builder. So var builder equal new configuration builder. Perfect. And now we need to utilize the config setup that we have before and add the builder to it. So config setup, and we're gonna config the builder. So now we have initiated a configuration builder that's provided for us by ASP.NET Core, and we are passing the builder here in order for it to be automatically set up. The next step is we're gonna be defining the Serilog configuration. So defining Serilog configs. We're gonna start by log.logger. This is a Serilog method, so let's put using Serilog, and from that on equal new logger configuration, and these are Serilog configurations. We're gonna start by reading from, so we're gonna tell it where is it gonna be reading its configuration from. So we're gonna say read from dot configuration, and we're gonna use the builder dot build. So what we are telling Serilog here, that you need to go to the builder that we have here. You need to check where is it getting its configuration, which is gonna be app settings, and it's automatically gonna be injecting all of this configuration that we have added in the appsettings.json into the Serilog configuration builder. And then we need to add an extra configuration, which is gonna be enrich from log context, which is gonna give us a better output or better information about the logs that we're getting. And then we're gonna decide where are we gonna be displaying these logs. So we're gonna put right to right now we're gonna only be displaying out of the console. And finally we're gonna create that logger. So we're gonna create logger, and that's it. So let us do a quick summary about this, because there's a lot of stuff here to unpack. The first thing is we have defined the new logger configuration for Serilog. We're telling it we're gonna give you default new configuration for your logger. The second one is we're telling it where it needs to read all of these configuration. So we're telling it that it needs to go to the configuration builder and read it directly from there. And then we're giving the logger more information of how it should display the output for us. So we said you need to enrich that output by giving us more information. And then we're specifying that we need to write to console. So we need to display those logs into console. We can change it here, for example, from console to For example, we can add it to Elasticsearch, we can add it to text files, we can do a lot of different configuration, but simply for the simplicity of this project, we're just gonna do it directly in the console. And lastly, we are initiating the logger. Great. So next step is we're gonna be defining our dependency injection model. So how are we gonna be doing that? Let's create a host equal host dot create default builder, and basically here we are initiating a host. So if we look at it, what does it do? It initiates the host builder, which basically means that it's utilizing the default dependency injection framework that ASP.NET Core provides. And then we're gonna be doing configuring services, configure services, and these configuration services here, if you have worked with ASP.NET Core before, you know in the startup class we have the configure services method. Here it's going to be the same thing. So this is basically, we're going to create a method out of this, and then we are able to add all of the services that we want to inject into our dependency injection. So let's do 2 parentheses, and let's create the context as well as the services. And then let's create a method. And from here, for now, we're gonna leave it empty because we don't have our classes and interfaces that we wanna inject, but we're gonna come back to this later on and add it for our dependency injection. And after that, we're gonna be, after that, basically, we're gonna just tell it to use Serilog. So use Serilog, and lastly we're gonna just tell it to build this configuration, to build this builder. So build. Perfect. So once we have added those, the last thing we need to do is we need to return the host, so we can utilize it within our main method later on. So this is also a very simple method. Let's do a quick overview of what we did. So the first thing that we did is we have created a configuration builder, and we have passed it to the config setup method that we have provided earlier, so it will be able to read the application settings. Then we defined the Serilog configuration. Then after that, let's add a comment here. Initiated the DI container. Let's put dependency injection container for us to use. And lastly, we have returned the host, which is going to be the iHost. Perfect. Now, once we have implemented these, let's create an interface, and let's create a class, and let's try to inject those. So first, let's create the interface, and we're going to call this interface an data service. And this interface is going to have only one method, which is a very simple method called connect. So to avoid to mimic, we are connecting to a database. And then we're going to create another class, which is going to call the data service. And this data service is going to inherit from the iData service. Sorry, it's going to implement the iData service. And now let's build this data service. So first of all, we're going to be adding the loggers and the configuration to it. And then we're going to be implementing the connect method. So first going to be private read only iLogger, because we want to log what's coming out of this service. So we're going to put data service, and we're going to call it _log. And then we're going to go private read only iConfiguration. And this is going to be _config. And here, let's use the extension. Let's fix the references. Perfect. Now let's create our constructor. And it's going to be iLogger of data service, call it log. And for the configuration as well, it's gonna be iConfiguration, gonna call it config. And then here all we need to do is just let's remove this one, we don't need it. it's gonna be log equal log and underscore config equal config. Perfect. So now we have injected these two methods directly into our constructor. Now we can define the method that we had, which is public void connect, and then here basically what we're gonna do is first we're gonna be reading the connection string. So if we are able to read that connection string, it means that we are able to connect directly to our app settings through dependency injection, which is what we need. And secondly, we just want to log that information out on an information level. And basically here we're trying to mimic if it's actually connected to the database without actually connecting. We're just reading it and mimicking that functionality if you want. So we're gonna using the logger, and we're gonna put log information, and basically we're just gonna give it the connection string, and let's make it SCS. And here we're gonna be defining the connection string. So first let's get this connection string. So it's gonna be var cs equal, we're gonna directly read from the configuration, and then we're gonna utilize the get value, and we're telling it that it needs to be a string value. And then after that, we're just basically defining where does it lay inside the app settings and with its structure. So if we go back to our appsettings.json, we can see that we have first the connection strings, and then we have the default connections. So we need to respect this hierarchy. So once we come back here, we need to put connection strings, and then we need to put colon for the hierarchy, and then it's going to be default connection. Once we have those, all we need to do is add here the CS, which is going to be the connection string that we were going to log out. Perfect. Now we have added these. Now let's update our startup class, or actually our startup method here, in order for us to utilize the interface and the class that we have just created. So how do we do that? All we need to do is inside our host builder, is we need inside our configure services, we need to create a transient service for it to automatically pick up the iData service as well as the data service. So how do we do that? It's very simple. We're just going to utilize the services dot add transient. Let's fix those references, and then all we need is we're going to pass the interface, which is going to be iData service, and then we're going to pass the data service, and we're gonna give it this way, and we're gonna So why did we use transient? Basically, transient means that every time a new instance is requested, a new object is generated for it. As simple as that. We can do add scoped, for example, but I think for right now, for this sample, we're gonna stick with transient. Perfect. Once we have added that, now let us build our app settings, our main functionality. We don't really need this function anymore. Let's remove it, and let's start implementing. So the first thing we're gonna need is the host. So we're gonna be referring to the app startup class. So we're gonna call it var host equal app startup. Perfect. So this is gonna provide us the host with all of the configuration. So, and after that, we're gonna be utilizing that service. So basically now we want to utilize the iData service. But you might ask, how are we gonna be referring to that iData service? Because if we see from the configuration of the data service, it's gonna require the logger, and it's gonna require the configuration. And we don't really want to do all of the manual work here to provide that to it. So how can we fix this issue? It's gonna be very simple. We're gonna just put var, and we're gonna call it data service, and equal. We're gonna utilize something that the .NET Core is gonna provide for us, which is gonna be activator utilities dot create instance, and we're gonna define what type of instance do you want to create, which is gonna be the data service instance. and then we're gonna give it all of the dependency injection that we have automatically initiated inside our app startup. So we're gonna put host.services, and once we have that, all we need to do is services, sorry, actually it's gonna be data service.connect. So let us explain what happened here. So the first thing that we did is we just called our startup function, and the startup function, as we have mentioned before, is going to do all of the wiring for our configuration, for our dependency injection and all of those, and for the logger, and it's going to return for us an iHost. So once it returned for us the host, we want right now to utilize the data service. But the data service, as we have as well discussed, it's going to have some dependency inside its constructor for it to load. So what we could have done is we could have said, for example, var log equal new logger and it's gonna be basically having those, and we can inject them in the data service, but that's not the way to do it. We want to utilize dependency injection to handle this, and one way to do it is utilizing the activator utilities. So since we have already have the app startup with us, and we have already initiated all of the dependencies here, so inside the services we have automatically initiated the service, and right now our dependency injection has automatically created the configuration, it has automatically created the loggers instances. We don't really need to do all of this work all over again. So for this reason, what we did is we utilized the activator utilities, which Microsoft provided for us within the dependency injection package, and we're telling it create an instance for data service and automatically give it all of the dependencies that it needs from the services that we have. So what this method is going to do is going to look inside the data service and check inside the constructor what does it need. So once it goes there, it's going to check, okay, it's going to need a iLogger of data service, and it's going to need an iConfiguration. And because we have already initiated them inside the services, it's going to say, okay, I have those. And basically here within those two parentheses, those services that we have already provided are automatically injected inside this data service. Perfect. And now we have our data service ready. And lastly, basically we're just initiating the method that we have, which is connect for this data service. Now let's run it. First, let us build it to make sure that we did not break anything. So .NET build. Perfect, build succeeded. Now let's run it. And now if this all is successful, we're going to be seeing the connection string popping out on the screen. So .NET run, and perfect, we can see that the log is being shown based on the information level that we have specified in our app settings, and we can see that our connection string has been shown up, which is data source app cached shared, which is exactly what we have inside the app settings. So in summary, what we did is we have added the app settings to the application, and then we have configured the config setup to read it and make it available for our application, and then we have passed it to the configuration builder. Then we have created the Serilog logger, and we gave it all of the right configuration. We created the dependency injection, and we gave it also all of its required configuration. And lastly, we created one data service with an interface, and then basically we injected, or we initiated this data service using dependency injection, and we made it run. Thanks a lot for watching. Please like and share this video if you find it helpful. Please, if you have any questions or any suggestions about topics that you'd like me to cover, please write them down in the comments down below. The source code will be available on GitHub, and the links for this will also be available in the description down below. Have a good day.